What if I told you that a sudden dramatic improvement in a struggling student's mood um, isn't actually a reason to celebrate, but could be the absolute loudest warning sign you could possibly look for?
Yeah, it completely flips your intuition upside down, doesn't it?
It really does.
You see a young person who, has been withdrawn and clearly in pain for months suddenly appear calm and resolved. And your natural human instinct is just to feel relieved.
You think, oh, brilliant, they finally turned a corner.
Exactly. But when we look at the reality of severe emotional distress, that sudden parting of the clouds often means they've actually formulated a plan to end their life.
Oh, wow.
And that calmness you're seeing is just, well, it's the relief of knowing their pain will soon stop.
That is honestly a really chilling realization. But I think it perfectly captures why we are here today. We're taking a deep dive into a stack of critical UK safeguarding materials.
Really essential stuff, yeah.
We've got the latest statutory guidance, so Keeping Children Safe in Education, KCSIE 2025, alongside the Level 3 Safeguarding Tutor Notes, the BS 30480 Workplace Suicide Prevention Guidelines, and some incredibly insightful safeguarding updates from Andrew Hall.
It's a lot of material to get through.
It is. And our mission today, specifically for you listening, the busy teaching assistant, pastoral worker, or teacher, is to sort of recalibrate how you look at the young people in your care. Because I like to think of a school environment like a complex radar screen.
Right.
And instead of just looking for the massive, loud, flashing red alarms, this deep dive is about learning how to spot the quiet, subtle blips that actually tell the most important stories.
Spot on. Because safeguarding in a modern British school environment isn't usually about dramatic interventions. It's really not. We are deliberately stepping away from fear-based language or sensationalism today.
We don't want to sound like a true crime documentary.
No, absolutely not. This is about learning to spot those quiet signals. We want you to feel more confident, deeply observant, and professionally grounded in your daily interactions, really recognizing that your calm presence is the most powerful safeguarding tool a school has.
And to build that calm presence, the guidance actually asks us to start with a foundational mindset. Across all these sources, from KCSIE to the training notes, the statutory baseline is maintaining an "it could happen here" mentality.
It's step one, always.
Right. But the Andrew Hall updates take this a step further by focusing on cumulative harm. And I found this concept fascinating because it shifts the focus completely away from looking for a single catastrophic event.
Yeah, cumulative harm is essentially the slow erosion of a child's well-being. When we look at early help, which is really the cornerstone of child-centered safeguarding, we aren't waiting for a crisis.
We aren't waiting for the flashing red light.
Precisely. We are looking for the point where a child's basic needs are just no longer being met. Cumulative harm acknowledges that a series of minor incidents, say an unwashed jumper on Monday, a sudden burst of anger over a dropped pencil on Wednesday, and then a missed homework assignment on Friday, they are not isolated events.
No.
They are interconnected data points.
I am struggling with this a bit, though, just playing devil's advocate on behalf of the listener. You're asking an overworked lunchtime supervisor or a teacher with 30 kids in a maths class to notice an unwashed jumper and somehow connect it to a dropped pencil days later.
It sounds like a massive ask.
It does. The guidance calls this professional curiosity. But how is it fair or even possible to expect staff to be amateur detectives when they barely have time to drink a cup of tea in the staff room?
That is such a valid frustration. The demands on school staff are immense right now. But the key to professional curiosity is understanding that it is absolutely not an investigation. You are not being asked to be a detective, interrogate the child, or solve a mystery. Professional curiosity simply means choosing not to take a presentation at face value.
Just questioning what's in front of you.
Yes. It is the mental act of noticing a deviation from a student's normal baseline and learning it.
Give me a sense of how that plays out in, say, a chaotic school corridor.
Okay, so imagine a pupil makes a vague passing comment as they leave for half-term. Something like, "I really hate the holidays, I just want to stay here."
Which a lot of people would just brush off.
Exactly. A lack of professional curiosity would be dismissing that as typical teenage moaning. But professional curiosity is simply thinking, that's an unusual thing for a 14-year-old to say, and recording it on the school system.
You don't investigate it yourself.
No, you don't pull them into an empty classroom and interrogate them about their home life. You just capture the signal. You are letting the system do the heavy lifting.
That makes it feel much more manageable. You aren't fixing the issue. You're just being the sensor that picks up the signal.
That's exactly it.
But that leads to a much heavier question. If cumulative harm is a slow drip, what do the internal distress it causes actually look like? Because the BS 3480 guidelines on suicide prevention completely dismantle the cultural myth that emotional distress is always loud and obvious.
The guidelines are adamant on this point. The reality of modern emotional distress is that it is often entirely hidden. The most vulnerable students might present as perfectly compliant, high-achieving, and incredibly quiet.
They slip right under the radar.
They do, and this document specifically challenges us to reframe our understanding of behaviors that make adults uncomfortable, particularly self-harm.
Which is so misunderstood. I mean, the phrase that always gets thrown around is attention-seeking.
Which is a deeply harmful myth that just needs to be eradicated from our educational vocabulary. The guidelines explain the actual mechanism behind self-harm. It is very rarely a manipulative bid for attention.
Right.
And is often not an immediate attempt to end the life either. For many young people experiencing overwhelming, unregulated emotional pain, self-harm is a coping mechanism.
A way to deal with the overwhelm.
Yes, it is a physical act used to ground themselves, or to translate invisible emotional agony into a tangible, physical pain that they can actually control and treat.
Understanding that mechanism completely changes the entire emotional dynamic in the classroom. If a staff member views self-harm as attention-seeking, their natural response is going to be frustration or dismissal.
Or even anger, yeah.
But if you understand it as a desperate coping mechanism for someone whose internal world is collapsing, your response naturally shifts to profound empathy.
And that empathy is what allows you to look out for the truly subtle behavioral shifts. You stop looking for dramatic crying fits in the corridor and start looking for apathy.
Just a complete flattening of emotion.
Exactly. A student who suddenly stops caring about a subject they used to absolutely love. A slow withdrawal from a previously tight-knit friend group, or even an increased reliance on energy drinks or vaping as chemical crutches. These are the quiet signals of a coping mechanism failing.
But those internal struggles don't happen in a vacuum, do they? The distress driving a student to self-harm or withdraw is increasingly coming from outside the school gates. Which brings us to a massive shift in the guidance contextual safeguarding.
Yeah, this is a really vital area. Historically, safeguarding frameworks were heavily biased towards the family home. The assumption was just if a child is unsafe, it's because of their parents or guardians.
Right, the danger is at home.
But contextual safeguarding, which is heavily emphasized in KCSIE, recognizes that as children transition into adolescence, their sphere of influence expands outward. The risks migrate into the community, into peer groups, and most pervasively, into the online spaces they inhabit.
And the Andrew Hall updates provide a stark look at the mechanics of these modern external pressures. It's miles away from traditional playground bullying. The notes highlight how the online manosphere and toxic ideologies can target young boys, which is incredibly concerning.
It is.
But I want to make it clear to the listener, we're just looking at the mechanics of what the source materials highlight here. How does that grooming actually happen? How does a 12-year-old boy end up consuming misogynistic content?
Well, the sources explain that it happens through the architecture of the platforms themselves. These algorithms are designed with one metric in mind, and that's engagement.
Right, keep them on the app.
Exactly. And nothing drives engagement quite like outrage and extreme viewpoints. So a young boy might go onto YouTube or TikTok to look for completely innocent advice on how to build muscle or improve at a video game.
Completely normal teenage stuff.
Totally normal. But the algorithm learns that he responds to male-centric content. Slowly, the recommendations shift from fitness tips to alpha male lifestyle videos, and then seamlessly into content that blames women for men's struggles or promotes aggressive dominance.
It's a funnel. They don't go looking for extreme ideologies. They go looking for belonging or advice, and the algorithm serves them extreme content because it keeps them watching.
Precisely. And we see a very similar mechanism of exploitation happening in the physical world with child criminal exploitation, specifically county lines. This is another area where staff need to completely overhaul their assumptions about what a victim looks like.
Because the stereotypical image is a child being forced into a car against their will in a dark car park. But the Level 3 training notes explain that county lines gangs use a highly sophisticated grooming process to manufacture what looks like consent.
That's the scary part. The mechanism of county lines relies on debt bondage and psychological manipulation. A gang member might approach a vulnerable teenager, maybe someone experiencing that cumulative harm at home we talked about, and buy them a meal or gift them a new pair of trainers.
Just being friendly.
Yes. They make that child feel seen, respected, and protected. Then the trap snaps shut. The teenager is suddenly told they owe a debt for those trainers, and the only way to pay it off is to hold a package of drugs or a weapon.
So by the time that teenager is caught carrying drugs in school, they might aggressively defend the gang members. They might have multiple mobile phones and unexplained cash, and they might genuinely believe they are making a proactive choice to earn respect.
They often do believe that. But KCSIE is unequivocal here. Regardless of how compliant or wealthy that older teenager appears, they are a victim of exploitation.
The power imbalance is absolute.
Completely absolute. And the same psychological mechanism applies to teenage relationship abuse. A young girl might misinterpret a boyfriend demanding her location 24/7 or isolating her from her friends as a sign of deep protective love. She just doesn't have the baseline to recognize coercive control.
Okay, I have to pause and look at this from the perspective of our listener again. You are outlining incredibly complex algorithms and highly sophisticated community drug networks.
I know, it's overwhelming.
If a teaching assistant only interacts with a child during a 40-minute maths lesson, how on earth are they supposed to monitor gang activity on a local estate or decipher a student's TikTok algorithm?
It sounds impossible. But the reassuring reality is that it is not their job to monitor the internet or police the local estates.
Okay.
Contextual safeguarding does not mean you follow the child into the context. It means you understand that the context exists and you watch for the ripples it causes in your classroom.
The ripples in the water. I like that.
Yes. You aren't looking for the drug deal taking place at midnight. You are noticing the pupil who is suddenly exhaustingly tired every single morning, unable to keep their head off the desk because they were out all night.
You're just looking at the presentation.
Exactly. You aren't reading their private messages. You're noticing the defensive, explosive aggression when a teacher asks to see their phone. You are watching for a sudden, dramatic shift in who they sit with at lunch. You only have to monitor the child sitting in front of you.
So let's say a staff member is monitoring that child, and they notice those ripples. Or, even more dauntingly, a child finally feels safe enough to approach that staff member and make a direct disclosure about abuse or suicidal thoughts.
Which is a huge moment of trust.
Massive. The Level 3 Safeguarding Tutor Notes provide a very specific protocol for this exact moment, don't they?
They do. The guidance is essentially a masterclass in emotionally intelligent responding. The absolute golden rule, which supersedes everything else, is to stay calm, listen actively, and do not panic.
Which is an incredibly tall order when a child is standing in front of you describing something horrific.
Yeah.
I mean, your internal alarm bells are screaming.
Your nervous system will naturally want to enter a fight or flight state. That's just human biology. But you have to consciously regulate yourself because of a psychological concept called co-regulation.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, a child in distress is entirely dysregulated. Their nervous system is overwhelmed. If they see you panic, their brain registers that the situation is even more dangerous than they thought, and they will just shut down.
They'll stop talking.
Instantly. But if you remain a calm, steady anchor, their nervous system can subconsciously latch onto yours. Your calmness provides the safety required for them to keep speaking.
The notes are also highly prescriptive about the language we use in those moments. They list calling suicide silly is devastating when you really think about it.
It minimizes their profound pain. It infantilizes them. And practically, it shuts down communication. If an adult frames a student's deepest despair as foolishness, that student will instantly regret opening up. Direct language proves you are strong enough to hear their reality without flinching.
There's one more rule in the Level 3 notes regarding disclosures that feels deeply counterintuitive. The rule that you must never, under any circumstances, promise a child that you will keep their secret.
This is a tough one for a lot of staff.
It goes against every human instinct when a vulnerable young person looks at you and says, "I'll tell you, but you have to promise not to tell anyone else."
It feels like a betrayal of trust to say no. But you have to understand the mechanism of secrecy in abuse. Secrets are the very tool abusers use to isolate their victims. If a trusted professional agrees to keep a secret, they are inadvertently reinforcing the isolation that is harming the child.
I think of the staff member's role in that moment like a triage nurse in an emergency room.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
When the patient comes through the doors, the triage nurse doesn't attempt to perform the surgery right there in the waiting room. Their only job is to stabilize the patient, assess the immediate danger, and keep them breathing until the specialist surgeon takes over.
That's exactly it.
When a child discloses to you, your job is to stabilize the situation. You listen, you validate their bravery, you stay incredibly calm, and you keep them safe in that room. But you cannot perform the surgery. You have to pass the patient to the specialist.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. You stabilize, and then you safely pass the baton to the designated safeguarding lead, the DSL, because the entire framework of KCSIE is built on the reality that no single professional ever has the full picture of a child's life.
Right. Instead of the old jigsaw puzzle cliche, I prefer to think of a school's safeguarding ecosystem as a mesh network.
I like that, a mesh network.
Yeah, every teaching assistant, caretaker, and maths teacher is an individual node in the network, picking up tiny bits of bandwidth. An unwashed jumper here, a defensive outburst there. On their own, those nodes can't process the big picture.
They just don't have the capacity.
Exactly. They have to transmit their data to the central hub, the DSL, who actually has the software to analyze the entire bandwidth and spot the critical threat.
But to make that mesh network function, the nodes have to be willing to transmit the data. And the biggest barrier to this in schools today is anxiety around data protection.
Oh, GDPR.
Yes. Staff are terrified of breaching the general data protection regulation. They worry they will be sued or fired for passing on sensitive information about a child's family life.
You hear it all the time. I can't log this conversation on the system. It's a breach of privacy.
KCSIE addresses this head-on. The Data Protection Act 2018 and GDPR are designed to protect data, not to protect abusers or endanger children. The law contains specific mechanisms, namely the vital interests and public task bases for processing data, that explicitly allow for the sharing of sensitive information to safeguard a child.
So privacy doesn't trump safety.
Privacy never trumps physical safety. Never. If you have a concern, the law protects your right to share it with the DSL.
But how you transmit that data matters just as much as doing it, doesn't it? The training notes emphasize recording the concern using the child's own words.
Very important point, yes.
If they use a specific slang term for a drug or an act of abuse, you write down that exact term. You don't translate it into polite adult language because you might inadvertently change the legal meaning of their disclosure.
And it must go on to the school's official reporting system immediately. No sticky notes on monitors, no entries in personal diaries that get taken home in a bag.
We've seen how badly that can go wrong.
We have. The Level 3 training uses the tragic Victoria Climbié case to illustrate why this is so critical.
Victoria's story is just heartbreaking. But it's important to recognize that her death wasn't simply the result of professionals not caring.
No, it was a failure of the mesh network. Multiple different agencies, housing, police, hospitals, social services, all interacted with Victoria. They all picked up tiny data points, minor injuries, or odd behaviors.
But they didn't talk to each other.
They operated in complete silos. They didn't transmit their data to a central hub. They assumed someone else was looking at the big picture. That case fundamentally altered UK safeguarding because it proved that failing to share seemingly insignificant pieces of information can literally be fatal.
It reinforces the reality that if your professional curiosity is triggered, if your gut says a baseline has shifted, there is no such thing as a detail that is too small to log.
None. There is absolutely no detail too small.
Well, we have covered a vast amount of ground today. We started by looking for the sudden, quiet calmness that can signal acute danger, and we unpacked the slow drip of cumulative harm.
We've explored how self-harm operates as a coping mechanism for distress, and how the algorithms of the manosphere and the grooming tactics of county lines manufacture false consent.
And crucially, we looked at how to respond. By utilizing co-regulation to remain calm, avoiding accusatory questions, refusing to keep secrets, and trusting the mesh network of your school safeguarding team to piece those signals together.
It really reframes the role of school staff, doesn't it?
It does. You don't have to be a detective, a counselor, or a superhero. You just have to be a calm, observant presence who knows how to spot a ripple and pass the information along.
But there's one final piece of the system that we haven't touched on, and it is perhaps the most important realization of all. If you are the node in this mesh network, if your professional curiosity and your emotional regulation are the radar keeping these children safe, what happens when your node loses power?
That is a profound question.
Because we ask education professionals to absorb a tremendous amount of secondary trauma. You are soaking up the distress of the students in front of you every single day. If you are exhausted, burnt out, and running on empty, your radar screen goes dark.
You just can't see the blips anymore.
You lose the capacity for professional curiosity because you barely have the energy to get through the lesson. You lose the ability to co-regulate a panicking child because your own nervous system is frayed.
So protecting your own well-being isn't just about personal self-care anymore.
It is a statutory necessity. Your mental health is the power source of the school's safeguarding ecosystem. Prioritizing your own boundaries, seeking supervision when a disclosure weighs on you, and recognizing when you need to step back is not selfish. It is the only way to ensure that when a quiet, subtle blip finally appears on the radar, you are fully powered up, focused, and ready to notice it.